Hello, my name is Ulrich Kohler. I am the discoverer of unconscious guilt and the developer of Losers. In the following videos I'd like to introduce you to the origin, the effects, and the release of unconscious guilt. Imagine there are two people. One of them is not doing well at all. They are suffering. Perhaps they have an injury or an illness, or have experienced a blow of fate, or anything else that causes them to suffer. The other person has their mind, and with their perception they can recognize my companion over there isn't doing well. As we humans are, it can happen that, more unconsciously than consciously, we ask ourselves the question, should I perhaps have done something better? Did I perhaps do something wrong? Is it perhaps because of me? Have I missed something? In short, am I to blame for the fact that my companion isn't doing well? Guilt, as we generally understand it, always has to do with our having done something wrong. We can actually only do something wrong if there is a frame of reference, if there are rules that define what is wrong and right. And rules always exist between entities, between things. So we humans have three major areas in which we classically experience guilt. First, we can have guilt toward God. By this, I mean the entire religious area, with all religions and all gods. But I don't just mean God. I also mean spiritual laws. For example, cosmic laws, karmic laws, moral rules, philosophical laws, ethical rules. Strictly speaking, by this G, I actually mean my personal greater. And between my personal greater and me there exist, at least in my perception, in my understanding it, some kind of higher order laws. These could just as well be called divine or spiritual laws. Now, I can ask myself, have I done something wrong with regard to my divine spiritual sphere? And that is why my companion is doing badly. Let us make this more concrete. Let us imagine that my neighbor went on holiday and caused an accident on the way. He is now in hospital with injuries, and he and his family are not at all well. I was not there. I was at home. Once again, the question, did I do anything wrong in the context of religious laws, of spiritual laws, such that this happened to my neighbor, that he caused an accident on his way to his holiday? In this case, I would say we can quite clearly come to the conclusion, yes, he is suffering, but it is not because I did anything wrong. The question, am I guilty here? I can tick that off. I am not guilty here. The second area of guilt I will simply call legal guilt. By that I mean all the laws, rules and regulations that we have in a country, in a state. There are, for example, you should not injure or kill anyone. You are not allowed to change a car's oil in the forest. We also have to pay taxes. And of course, you are not allowed to drive too fast either. Now I can ask myself, did I perhaps break any law, step out of line legally? And is that why my neighbor was seriously injured on his way to his holiday? Once again, I come to the same conclusion. Yes, he is suffering, but it is not because of me. I can tick that off. The third major area in which we can typically experience guilt is our emotional social environment. By this I mean all the people with whom we have an emotionally felt social relationship. Naturally, there is my family, but also my other relatives, my friends, my neighbors, and my colleagues at work, and so on. all people with whom I have an emotionally felt social relationship. In this area, it is not divine rules that apply, nor legal ones, but rather forms of social conduct, traditions, customs, and conventions. Here too I can ask myself, have I behaved so far out of line with regard to forms of social conduct, customs, and conventions that my neighbor had the accident? No, I have not done that either, so here I can tick off the question of guilt. This brings me clearly to the realization, yes, he and his family are suffering, but the question of my guilt I can tick off. If we humans were merely beings of intellect, which we most certainly are not, I could say, he is suffering, his family is suffering, I have done nothing wrong here, or here, I am not guilty, so it does not touch me, it does not affect me, it is as if it had not happened at all. But we humans do not have intellect alone. I give it a symbol, a heart. We also have feelings, we also have compassion. And when we feel with someone who is suffering, what do we want then? Yes, that is right. We want to help, to rescue, to soothe, to comfort. We want this person to be well again. Do we always manage that? Do we succeed? No, very often we do not. With my imagined neighbor, I do not succeed either. When I feel with my companion who is suffering and cannot help, a feeling can easily arise in me. A feeling of, I should have, I really had to, why was I not able to? It is a feeling of a subtle guilt that does not break through into my consciousness, not least because my intellect rightly asks, have I done anything wrong? I have not, so I am not guilty. But my heart would have so liked to help, to rescue, to soothe, to comfort, and to heal. Now I have this unconscious guilt. Now I can ask myself, does this affect me at all? Does it have an effect? And it does have an effect. To understand this, we have to look back about 2 million years. Then we see that we still live together in small groups, in several families, extended families and bands, which one might also call a tribe. All around the tribe there was always some kind of wilderness, steppe, savanna, tundra, desert, or jungle. If I am part of my tribe and have incurred guilt, for example, I have lived in a way displeasing to our gods, blasphemed against them, or I have broken or violated our tribal laws, or I have interpreted our forms of social conduct very, very loosely, what could then happen? Exactly. It could happen that my tribe would say to me, you no longer belong with us, you are cast out. If I was cast out by my tribe 2 million years ago, that was for me a fairly certain death sentence. Because I cannot keep watch every night to stay awake enough to bring myself to safety from threatening situations and animals, and over time be clear enough during the day to find my food. That means that for at least 2 million years, and I suspect far longer, we have this combination. Guilt endangers belonging, and the loss of belonging means death. But a mechanism has also developed that can make it possible for me to return to the community. Or it can also ensure that if I have not yet been thrown out, I am not thrown out in the first place. This mechanism is called making amends. This making amends must, of course, always relate to the wrongdoing that has occurred. If the guilt I have taken upon myself was towards the divine sphere, then my making amends must also take place in that realm. Then it is a matter of paying homage to the gods, making sacrifices, submitting, perhaps offering oneself up to them, whatever it may be. If I have sufficiently made amends for the guilt towards the gods, then I am allowed to belong again and can survive. If my guilt was towards our tribal laws, then of course it is a matter of accepting the verdict of the Council of Elders. of accepting the punishment and bearing it, then I can remain part of my survival group again. If my guilt was towards our social conventions, if I behaved incredibly badly, then the making amends must of course take place in that area. Then I need insight, realization, I must apologize, show remorse, do penance, in other words, change my behavior, then I am allowed to belong again. If we look more closely at our society, at our circle of friends, at our work environment, then even today there is still this. If I do anything wrong here, I risk being pushed to the margins, perhaps being excluded, and the way back to belonging is called insight making amends. And this is an ancient program within us. I am deeply convinced that our subconscious, which is a kind of guardian of our survival, of course also notices when I have an unconscious feeling of guilt. Because for a long time now, guilt has meant I can lose belonging and die, but making amends can save me. I am convinced when our unconscious lives in the assumption, in the feeling, in the sense of guilt, I am to blame, then of course the alarm goes off. Oh God, because of this guilt I could be excluded, and if I am excluded, then I will die. But there is, after all, that tried and tested mechanism that lets me come back, or make sure that I am not thrown out in the first place, and this mechanism is called making amends. Because in my perception I am not aware of this guilt at all. Since it is unconscious guilt, I do not even notice that my unconscious is in a state of distress and is shifting into a state of making amends. That is why this form of making amends is a completely unconscious making amends. When I began to understand this in 2006, I spent months exploring what the mechanisms of this unconscious making amends are. Back then I found 4 of them. Mechanism number 1. If I am to blame for my companion feeling bad for them suffering, for them having to endure bad feelings, then surely it is simply fine and okay that I too, who cannot help them, hang my head and feel bad as well. For how can I be allowed to feel good when I cannot help my companion who is suffering? Then the unconscious holding on to distressing emotions becomes a survival strategy that goes completely unnoticed by us. Mechanism number 2. If I am to blame for my companion feeling bad, then surely it is fine that symbolically, like a person with a shovel, I am ready to perform, to do, to act, to serve, to take on duties, to give myself over to tasks, and to gradually lose sight more and more of my own wishes, needs, goals, and hopes. For how may I make sure that I am well when I could not help the one who was feeling bad? Then surely it is fine that I subordinate myself to duty. Then the unconscious taking on of excessive duty and the placing of one's own needs, wishes, and hopes last has become a survival strategy. Mechanism number 3. If I am to blame for my companion having lacked something, warmth, for example, affection, belonging, love, acceptance, money, prosperity, a secure existence, then surely it is simply completely fine and okay that I deny this to myself, that I unconsciously push away, reject what I could not give to the one who did not have it. For how may I have, when my companion suffered from lack? Then surely it is fine that I unconsciously withhold from myself. Then the unconscious self-withholding and sabotage of one's own wishes, goals, and hopes has indeed become a making amends and survival strategy. Mechanism number 4. If I am to blame for this one here feeling bad, then surely it is simply fine, then surely it is completely okay that I too feel bad, that I too turn things into a kind of ball and chain for myself as a punishment. Then I simply have depression. Then I simply have sleep problems. then I simply have the tendency to make the wrong decisions at the wrong moment. Then I simply have this or that physical complaint, and so self-punishment becomes quite directly yet another survival strategy. These four mechanisms of unconscious making amends cannot in themselves be directly treated or resolved because they are survival strategies. And the unconscious does not simply let its survival strategies be taken away. It is just as if the two of us were standing on the shore of a large lake, and out there someone is swimming. We ask that person to please stop making swimming movements. We ask them politely, we ask them insistently. They do not stop. We demand, we scold, we shout. They will wonder, what do those two want over there? What is the matter with them? But what they will not do, they will not stop swimming, because for them it is essential for survival. That is how it is with our unconscious. When our unconscious holds the conviction, I am to blame because I could not help, and so I am in danger of being cast out, of dying, but there is the possibility of belonging again through making amends. And the mechanisms of making amends are these. Then they are carried out with the intensity of survival. The solution, therefore, does not lie with the mechanisms themselves. The solution, of course, lies here, in the realm of unconscious guilt. Who is the only person, I mean the absolute only person in your life who is able to take your unconscious guilt off you? That's right, it is you yourself. For there was no God and no spiritual rule. There was no judge and no public prosecutor. There was also no mum and no dad and no one else who said, you are to blame for your neighbor having caused an accident on holiday and now feeling bad. This guilt that I could not help, I alone took upon myself. That is why I am the only person on this planet who is able to take this guilt off myself again. This process, however, has to happen past our mind, because it asks, did I do something wrong? Which rules did I break? None. Good, then I am not to blame. So we have to find a way to take the guilt off ourselves by passing the mind. We can do this by speaking what are called guilt release statements. When we speak such guilt release statements, we do not concern ourselves with what our reason, our mind has to say about it. We pay attention to one thing only. How does the statement feel, and what does my body say to it? Does it react in any way? Here there are three different observations that can happen. Possibility number one, I speak such a guilt release statement and it stays neutral. Nothing happens at all. Here there are three further possibilities. A, either I was in a non-feeling state while speaking, that is easy to switch off. B, or there is no unconscious guilt relating to this content. C, or I phrased the statement incorrectly. If I then phrase it correctly and still nothing happens, then it is simply neutral. Then there is no unconscious guilt present. Possibility number two. I speak a guilt release statement and I experience a spontaneous stress response. Figuratively speaking, it pulls me down. My throat tightens. Right away, that is not delayed in the moment of speaking. I get distressing feelings. Something happens in my body. There's pressure, there is warmth, there is cold, there is stiffening, whatever it may be. The third possibility, I speak a guilt release statement and a spontaneous relief response occurs. If I have a neutral response, I do not need to continue with this guilt release statement. I can tick it off. If I have a relief response or a stress response, then it is a matter of repeating this guilt release statement, adjusting it, adapting it, and depending on what then happens, perhaps forming other kinds of statements. The point is that when we do this correctly, and that happens easily, this previously reactive guilt release statement now shifts into neutral and no longer brings any relief or strain with it. Neutral means I have taken the unconscious guilt off myself. When this unconscious guilt is gone, then I am no longer in danger of being excluded because of this guilt. Because of this guilt, I will also no longer perish. That is why, for this unconscious guilt, I also no longer need to make any unconscious making amends. The four mechanisms of unconscious making amends switch themselves off on their own, because they no longer have any survival function and are now nothing but a waste of energy. In the end, it is always only about this. There is something that feels with, and there is something that suffers. And whether this feeling with arises towards a companion or, for all I care, towards a pet, let us say a cat, makes no difference. When the cat suffers and I feel with the cat's suffering, then it can quickly happen that I take on an unconscious guilt if I cannot ease the cat's suffering. In just the same way, it can be that for a suffering of my own that I experience and cannot help myself with, I impose an unconscious guilt on myself. So we have now seen how unconscious guilt arises and how it affects us and how we can take it off ourselves. Since 2006, quite a few years have now passed. Intensive practical work, intensive self-experience, intensive stumbling across things and investigating have led to a fixed, dynamic system developing out of the understanding of unconscious guilt, its effect and its resolutions, a system for dealing with it constructively and in a resolving way. This can be learned. The complete method is called LOSUS. If anyone is interested in this, they are welcome to take a look at our website where there is information about LOSUS. You can take part in a workshop in order to help yourself as well as possible. Or there is, of course, also the possibility of doing a LOSUS practitioner training in order to apply LOSUS professionally. Thank you very much for your attention. See you then.